All right, let's get going. Today, we got, and this is in response to a recent announcement from Microsoft about an app switcher capability or an identity switcher capability, a tenant switcher capability, and we realized that we work a lot across tenants and identities in Microsoft 365. So we wanted to take today to talk about that announcement and some of the other tools that are available to us for working across tenants and identities. Emily, did you like the clip art I dropped in there? I was really proud of that one.
That's a pretty good one. Yeah.
I thought it was, that was
well thought out.
Yep.
So as usual, we've all got different points of view on the topic because we do different stuff and play slightly different roles. So you'll hear kind of a wide range of opinions from this group, and please feel free to chime in yourselves. So we'll talk through the account switcher, some of the things we've found when we've been testing it and playing with it, and other options for working across tenants and identities like browser profiles, progressive web apps, and team share channels. So let's talk about what got announced and what got changed. Mark, were you going to walk us through this?
Was I? Sure.
Maybe we should have a plan B.
So I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, Verizon man, go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So
Stop switching between applications.
Exactly.
Hands off the keyboard. So this was recently announced and started to roll out in certain apps in Microsoft 365. So the list is on a slide later, but it's specific applications where we can log into multiple tenants and switch between them within the same browser session. So this is something that a lot of us have asked for a long time. It's been something that we've had in Azure for a while. It's something you see on lots of other websites, and something that we think is really going to improve the user experience, especially for people who end up working with maybe an outside vendor or a partner and need to switch their own Microsoft 365 tenant into someone else's on a regular basis. So this is in progress. It's supposed to roll out between now and I think late June across all tenants, and you'll see it light up in different applications at different times. We see it in our tenant and in some, not all of the applications.
Well said.
Yeah, this slide is just a quick view of essentially what Mark just spoke through, and they are showing it to us in a variety of the different solutions in Microsoft 365. In this image, they do show it in SharePoint and in OneDrive, but we haven't seen that rolled out just yet.
We've only seen it from the app launcher, or have we seen it from elsewhere? From office.com, excuse me.
I've only seen it from portal.office.com myself.
Yeah,
I
same.
can see it in PowerPoint.
Oh, interesting.
Emily's special.
In this app, so PowerPoint, Excel, PowerPoint, Excel, Word, I think we've seen it. Outlook, we've seen it.
Teams?
Not me.
Outlook in the web, sorry.
Teams,
I have-
Caleb asked Teams.
Yeah, I have not
But
seen it for
it's-
Teams on the web yet.
Let's talk about why we care, why this might work. These were some scenarios that we identified. Obviously, as consultants, during any given week, we might work with 3 or 5 different clients, and the ability to have multiple client sessions open at the same time and easily toggle across them is super useful to us. But even if you're in-house somewhere, if you have external partners like Mark alluded to during the transition associated with a merger and acquisition activity a lot, and developer tenants. So this is the requisite nod to the go get a developer tenant if you don't have one already.
I think I'm gonna say it here and now. I think we need, yes, for fun. Let's see if every other ask and praxis for the rest of the year we can find a way to work in the dev tenant comment. Like, but it has to be in context. It can't actually just be like a gratuitous link. We actually have to make it part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think it should be our purpose in life to make sure that every single person this call has one.
We'll take a poll.
I think we should also, and Emily's point is a really good one. They're called developer tenants, but anyone can sign up for a tenant. Think of it as a test tenant. Think of it as a playground, a sand, whatever you want to think of it as. But you can own, I think it's 25 sample users and test anything you want. Great for learning.
You could have 25 users. It don't have to be test users. So you can get 25 of your closest friends.
Sure.
And give them logins to it. You don't have to use the test users.
So Julie, extra points too if we factor in both the dev tenant message and the lack of a Pages API complaint. Do we get extra bonus points for that?
Sure, and we just did. Good on us.
Fair enough. And Caleb's got a good point. Like a friend of mine used to say, if it's free, I'll take two. So take two this one. Also, there's times when you don't need another tenant. You just need to work as a different person within your own tenant. As an administrative user, I use this a lot with multilingual, MG Spanish, MG French, MG German, so I can keep those settings toggled. If I was testing in Japanese, that was really useful to me because I could have two screens up and see what the titles of things actually meant rather than trying to know by memory where they go on the screen. So multilingual testing, that was really useful. And Microsoft talks about the work versus personal accounts, which I think we were a little more down on as a group when we talked about this in our prep. Other scenarios why people use this, or what other scenarios that we didn't address that people find?
Anybody?
I think there's some community scenarios where you might be joining another tenant for an event, especially as a speaker. That's very common.
Mm-hmm. And I think we encountered it this morning on the community call. There's a tenant switch in Teams that you've got to do to get access to the channels and the files and the content there, correct?
Yep, for sure.
That's the community advisory board that Mike was referencing. I'll pop a link to that into the chat.
Yeah, I just popped in. On one of my test tenants, I can see the switcher in all the Office apps. I can't see it in the Teams app.
Okay.
Right now.
So this probably is refreshing right now in terms of limitations and benefits in terms of the rollout and where you can see this. Anybody want to talk about what we found when we tested this?
We found that it's painful.
I'll be honest. I found it to be
I think I mean we all were. Should I stop?
You just are breaking up an awful lot. It's tough to hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. I will.
Anyway, I think I can speak. I think what he was going to talk about is the fact that you have to be educated, right? You have to understand what is actually happening. So if you have a bunch of tabs open to your browser, and let's say you have portal.office.com open on one tab, and then you have SharePoint open on another tab, and you do the tenant switching, let's say when it's available in SharePoint, and you switch there, the other tab isn't effectively switched right away until it's switched. And when that isn't, we couldn't really figure out. So I think that's the confusing part.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine my mom using this. And my mom's not, particularly tech bad. But yeah, the fact that we would switch in one tab, we would see the new user, we would go back to another tab and it would still be the old user, and we would scroll and everything would seem to be fine. And so, yeah, it just seemed really confusing. Now, as we talk about some of the other options here in a minute, they also have end user education aspects, but this one just seemed, I was kind of disappointed because they've been threatening to do this account switching thing forever, and Google has had it forever. And I've always said, I wish Microsoft could do this like Google. And then it came out and I kind of went, it was kind of a nothing burger. I wasn't too excited about it.
Yeah, and I have to wonder too, Todd, if that's just because it's not fully rolled out yet, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it's going to get smoother once all the surfaces have it loaded and everything is good to go. So it's maybe we're being a little premature to judge it so harshly, but it just feels like if to me, it felt like I could document some of the other ways to do this that a user could follow more cleanly than I could document the multiple tabs and what scenario would go with what. And I felt like that would be harder to communicate to somebody. Saying that I'm a user and I don't know either way, I feel like I can walk somebody through doing some of these other things easier than I can walk them through how the tenant switcher thing would fail.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that made this made me nonplussed on this is I've been using some of the other techniques for a while, so they're entrenched. They're just, there's. So I think that's probably another reason. If this would have been the first one I'd have used, I might like it best.
Right. We've already solved for this in the past. Let's talk about those other techniques. Let's jump ahead a little bit.
One more comment.
Go ahead, Emily, sure.
On benefits limitations. I think that we're heavy users of those different accounts. So in the future, when it does come to things like OneDrive and SharePoint, I actually see this being more useful, where you have one organization from their tenant sharing like SharePoint news out to you via email, and you just want to read that one page and then go back to what you're doing. I think those lightweight interactions will be really beneficial to use this. But right now, because it's only been launched in the web apps where you're spending more time and investment working, it doesn't really seem as much of a benefit.
So Emily, right now it's right click on the link in that email message, alt tab over to the correct instance of a browser, paste it in there, right? Or if it was the last browser you were in, you can click on it and it'll go to the right place. But if you've got 4 open, I usually just copy the link and then paste it into the right browser.
I think it's also the new version of Firefox, I want to say. I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's Firefox where the profiles aren't different windows. They're different. The tabs are profiles, and that's a whole different ballgame. Stefan Bauer uses that, and I'm like, whoa, okay. And they're like color coded in the whole 9 yards. That's a little advanced.
We should add
fine,
that. We should add that to this deck if we can get Stefan's
I had
thoughts
forgotten that he does that.
Yeah, it's really good. Well, let's show our sad little version of that now, Julie.
Thanks a lot, Julie.
This is something that, sorry, go ahead, Todd.
No, I was going to say, if nobody was going to take it, go ahead.
This is something that I use all the time. So I create a different profile for each of my clients or, tenants that I'm working in. And what I really like about the browser profiles versus the web app account switching is that when I have multiple tabs of what I was working on and I close out the browser and then I reopen it the next day, I am brought exactly to where I was working. With the account switching, because you are only able to be in one app under one profile at a time, you're continually going to have to navigate to where those documents were saved and reopen them. So I really don't feel like there's a big benefit for me in how I work with those account switching.
No. So I when we were prepping for this, I could think of 0 scenarios where account switching would be better for me than browser profiles. And I've seen a couple of people in the chat, Caleb, hope you're sitting down, mentioning that they were using, like they'd have, an IE or not an IE, an Edge in private, a Firefox, but they'd have all these different combinations to get into different accounts. Profiles removes the need for all of that.
Agreed.
So first, let's talk about before we had profiles, we had in private mode, and that was great. Except every in private mode you brought up per Edge or per Chrome or whatever shared the same environment, so you could only really have 2 accounts. With browsers, you get as many as you want. I've probably got 20, and at any time, I probably have 6 different profiles in Edge active at the same time, and they never cross-pollinate or anything like that. So I never have to open up Chrome or Firefox or anything. It's all Edge all the time. So we've talked about like the news thing, clicking on that. One of the features you can have in profiles is you can tell Edge, always open this URL in this profile. So for instance, if we were getting the news emails to my Simpraxis account, Mike talked about we have to make sure you copy the URL and paste it in the right profile, whatever. In my profile settings, I have anything that is simpraxisconsulting.sharepoint.com always open in my Simpraxis browser. Doesn't matter, or profile. Doesn't matter where I click it, my email, whatever, always goes to the right spot. So that's awesome. Another thing that I do with these is I have what I call an ephemeral profile. And so that's one where I can remove cookies and things like that, because if you go to in private mode, one of the things that can't happen is that site can't, read cookies and stuff like that. But then websites are smart enough to check for that, so they can see if you're in private mode, and then they won't let you get around things. So I have this one throwaway profile that I open those kind of links in, flush the cookies every time. I love the hell out of profiles. And Mark mentioned in the chat room that if you have a Microsoft account, you can sync the profiles so that if you create the same profile with the same Microsoft account on another machine, it'll sync your history and your favorites and all that. So Caleb's asking, how do I apply browser profiles to my Office 365 desktop apps? The desktop apps themselves have account switchers in them, so you should be able to switch between those. It's kind of a pain, but it already
just gonna bring that up, and it kind of is smart about it. And in Windows, the way to get those registered is in that in the settings page in Windows. And of course, I can't remember the brick that is, but there's like a place
accounts,
where you.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
it's accounts, but it's under that. Like accounts and work and school, there's a section, and then you can put all the accounts in there, and then they show up in the desktop apps as this switcher. And sometimes, not all the times, when you say open in desktop app from one of your profiles, and you have that account registered in that whatever, it will switch the profile for you. I've had it do it anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, profiles, man, this was a life changer for me. I use these everywhere. They are phenomenal. And so like the work at home, I have a home profile and a work profile everywhere. Every customer that I ever use that gets their own profile, it is the way to go.
And a lot of great how-tos in terms of blog articles about browser profiles and SharePoint. I can think of at least a half dozen right off the top. There's a ton out there. So one's linked in here. So let's graduate up from browser profiles to a cooler approach. Todd, I know this is your happy place here.
So this was one, I think we all agree that the Teams client, and in this context, I mean the Windows Teams client, but I think it probably is true for all. The Teams client sucks. And it sucks for many reasons. We could do a whole half hour on that, but it really sucks for changing identity and changing tenants. So a long time ago, I started using the web version of Teams for some things, and then the desktop one. But then I got into this issue where if I was using the web Teams client in a browser, and then I would go someplace and I would click something, it would click in that same window and it would open another tab, and it got very confusing. And so then that's when I discovered the progressive web apps, or the PWAs. So I went to the office.com Teams client in the browser, and then clicked this apps install as an app in Edge, and it installs it as an app, but that app is an instance of Edge running the web client. So this is handy because now I have a PWA instance of Teams that I can switch tenants to do whatever with. And then I have my desktop version. So now I can kind of have two going, and it's easier to keep multiple conversations going or whatever. But then what I noticed is that works for anything. So Edge is smart enough that pretty much any web page can be installed as a PWA. So you can see in here, I've got a bunch of them. I didn't count them, but there's probably close to 20. So another thing that I would have a problem with is if I was watching a YouTube video and I would pull the tab out and separate the tab and put it on monitor, maximize it. But then sometimes I would click a link, and if it was right for the profile that YouTube was in, and I clicked YouTube last, then it would open up in there and it would be a tab and all that. So then I'm like, well, YouTube, progressive web app, poof. Now I have a YouTube app that is just the web page, but no clicks ever go there. So that's that click segregation at the end. If the web page is written in such a way, this can support offline mode. So you can do offline stuff. They can be pinned just like a regular program to your start and your taskbar. I use this for all kinds of stuff. So any video thing, so you can see in there like Netflix, any of that kind of stuff, YouTube TV, whether it's got a web app or not, I just do the progressive web app and they all get separated. I love these things.
The only problem that I saw with the Teams one, and it's been a while since I tried it again, so they may have fixed this, but if I have multiple browser profiles and I install Teams as a web app in more than one of them, when I open those Teams apps up, whatever the last one is, whatever tenant it switched into, all the Teams web apps that are running switch into that team. So
I've not ever tried to have more than one.
Yeah. So I don't know. That was my experience. I only really find that I need to have desktop client and one Teams web app
Yeah.
open. And then I
Yeah.
use the web one. I switch between some of the other ones when I need to quickly get into them, but I haven't been able to have multiple Teams web apps in separate tenants at the same time.
Yeah.
So speaking of working across tenants in Teams, let's talk a little bit about something that Microsoft announced a while ago and we're seeing a little bit more use of. I think Mark was going to talk about this. We'll see if your audio holds up, Mark.
You try. Just wave at me if I should stop. So shared channels is a new capability, and it's a little bit different than what we've done in the past, where we could invite external users into channels that we already have that we're using as a team. We can invite external users. So I could invite Mike's Gmail account, for example. With channels, you're actually setting up essentially federation between two organizations, and to invite the user's identity in that other tenant into your shared channel. So for example, on this, in these screenshots, I've got my SimpMark tenant, and we have a Simp demo tenant. And we've got those two tenants set up so that they allow inbound and outbound requests, and we can invite people from one tenant to the other. So this is great where you have specific outside entities that you want to allow in as much sort of more equal partners inside the channel. You're only adding them to that particular channel. One of the drawbacks that I've found as I've been researching this is that with external users, when you add them, Mike's Gmail account, it gets added into Azure Active Directory, and I can see that his Gmail account is in there as an external user. Where we're adding, and actually the terminology is getting confusing too, because I'm saying external user, but in actual fact, in Teams, they are guest users. They're added to Azure Active Directory as external users. If you share channels, they're added as external users in Teams, and they don't show up in Azure Active Directory. You're actually doing, what is it, an OAuth? You're this really Mike? Yes, that's really Mike. Okay, cool. I'm going to let him in. So they're not authenticating against your Azure Active Directory. They're authenticating against their own. So some of the kinks will get worked out here. Some of the sort of user interface from an administrative perspective will improve. But it's a great way to build partners. And you can see that the in that screenshot have a different icon next to them to show that they share channels, and what we show in that screenshot to the right is how you manage that channel. You can see the member. Adele actually is in the Simp Design organization. You can see in her row, whereas Mark, me, is in the SimpMark organization.
And Mark, just for, and anyone can answer this, but so we're all clear. Under the covers, when I create a share channel, I'm creating a new site collection with external sharing enabled. Just from a governance point of view, I want that to be clear for folks.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. And that SharePoint site that is created for that shared channel has its own template. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it's a very down site that doesn't have much to it. It's really only there for document storage.
Yep. Okay. Seeing a lot of chat in the meeting chat. I think we're covering things. Are there any unanswered questions? Thinking across these, 3 or 4 options for working across tenants, working across identities.
Anyone? Bueller?
Good point, I think, by Mike Duffy about if you're using a progressive web app for Outlook, you might miss desktop notifications, right? If they don't come through to your desktop, they live within that browser session.
Yeah, you have to turn that on. So it's a good point. Like if
You
don't
can
have
turn
it
that
set
on?
up right. Yep.
In the
Yeah.
PWA?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah.
Because I get Teams notifications in my Windows 10 notification center.
Really?
Yep.
All right, good. Because I use profiles, not PWAs and I miss a bunch of notifications because I'm not in that browser, right? I'm just
Yep.
doing other stuff. Cool.
Yep.
That's super
It
helpful.
actually asks you, and I think it's in the top. I should look. I can look. Okay, what you're joined a team as the guest. Lovely. No, that's not what I want. I think. Yeah. Yeah, it's so in the PWA, it makes it look like a window, and over to the right where there's the minimize, maximize, and close, there's a ... and that has the web browser settings for that, and I think it's in there.
Gotcha.
Anyway, I'd have to
To-
like dig in a little more.
To Glenna's point, there's something that shows up upper right and makes noise. I agree. I think that absolutely there's something that shows up upper right and makes noise. That's kind of a universal thing. So thanks for calling that one out, Glenna. Appreciate it.
Not cool, Mike. Not cool.
He's in my upper right in the Teams chat right now. That's where his image is. So maybe that's just where he is.
Not cool. I've had a rough week, Mike, and I just,
Oh, please.
Cobra Kai, man, sweep the leg. No mercy. All right,
first.
so couple resources we dropped in here. The update from Microsoft, a little bit more information about shared channels, and then that Practical 365 article about browser profiles. There's a ton out there. So a couple things coming up. I guess Thrive is the next one, and Mark, I think you're on the hook for this one, correct? You're on the hook for Thrive? That's a nod. That's a muted nod.
We're not letting him come off mute anymore.
Fair enough. And then 2 weeks from today, we're going to drill into Microsoft Loop. I think we've seen Loop for a while now, and we've always felt like it's a solution
Loopy about
without
it.
a good
Let's
use
just say we're gonna
case.
get loopy.
We're gonna sift through some of those use cases that we've started to identify, and we've been playing with it, and hopefully do some real-time demo as well. Show stuff with you. So that's 2 weeks out, June 1st. Is there anything else before we close?
Nope.
Then thank you for joining, everybody. Thank you for the insights and the preps and praxis team, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Cool. Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you.